Well, hello and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. My name is Harold Thornborough. I'm joined today by Takota Coen. Takota has been a guest before on the podcast. I guess it was a little over a year ago. Welcome to the podcast again, Takota.
My pleasure to be here, man.
Well, I didn't get the pleasure of talking to you last time. Rachel interviewed you. It's too bad she couldn't be here today. She wasn't feeling well, so she had the coughs. So she bailed out of this one. But I was real happy to talk to you. Matter of fact, I was kind of upset that I missed the last time you were on because I listened to that episode, and you just had you brought the value for sure. You had a lot of you just basically talked about the things you were doing on your homestead/farm, and it was amazing. You're doing some really cool stuff as far as just implementing permaculture and regenerative agriculture. But we want to talk about that beyond your homestead maybe today, and talk about how anyone else can really implement these things onto their homestead. Or start out that way. I know a lot of folks are just beginning, and it's a good place to start because sometimes I think it might be a little more difficult to implement them later, but it's really nice if you can just head that direction right in the beginning because trees don't change positions too easy and things like that. So it's nice that you understand it when going in. So
definitely, what I would pay to go back 10 years and talk to myself.
Yeah. I know when I first started, I had to move a lot of things that weren't so easy to move because I changed my mindset on things. But before we jump into all that, last time you were on, which was, like I said, February of last year, back in episode 235, if anybody wants to go listen to it, you shared a lot about your story and things. But if you want to just give us the elevator pitch on that, kind of who you are and what you do before we jump into this.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to be born and raised on a mixed farm in central Alberta, Canada. My folks had 250 acres, and I basically grew up in the Shire. It was an incredible life. We had our own milk cow, big gardens. My mom fed, and all six of us kids from the garden, and just loved that lifestyle. But there was never any money in it, was kind of how I was raised. So after high school, I was kind of encouraged to go get some kind of a job or a career. Got my dream carpentry ticket, did that for a few years, and just really wanted to come back to the farm and find a way to make a go of that. Did that in 2012, quit my construction work, came back full-time to the farm. And since then, I've just been really using my land as a guinea pig for all the stuff all the courses and books and stuff I'd read online for permaculture, holistic management, regen ag, all that stuff. Made a ton of mistakes, had a few successes, and now I'm lucky enough to be able to, I still farm with my folks, but I actually help other homesteaders and farmers all around the world to buy, design, develop, and manage land from anywhere from a few acres to we've got some clients that are in the 2,000 plus range. So that's my I have to pinch myself every morning when I wake up because it feels like it's too good to be true. Yeah,
you're doing some amazing things, and I love how you talked about mistakes there. You learn from your mistakes, and that is how we learn. But it's a lot better if you can learn from other people's mistakes than your own. So that's why I love having folks on who admit to making those mistakes. They've learned a lot. Now they can kind of help us skip those mistakes by learning from there. So I'm all about that.
Yeah, I never went to university, but I have several $100,000 in tuition from School of Hard Knocks that.
It's a sure way. You won't forget that education. That's for sure. It'll teach you for life. Well, you're, like I said, you're doing some pretty amazing things, but it's great that you can do those things on your property, but you're stepping out and helping others implement those things on their property. So I guess where I want to go is by turning it over to you and just kind of taking us through that process. I mean, what do you want to talk about first when it comes to designing and implementing kind of regenerative systems on somebody's property?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book I wrote, building your permaculture property, a 5-step process to design, develop land. 5 steps that I lay out in that book is step 1 is clarify your vision, values, and resources. So that's what do you want, what do you have, what's right, and that's the place that all of my clients start at. And if I'm doing courses or anything like that, that's the most important thing that I think is missed. Is really getting clear on what you want, what you already have, and what your values are. because right there you can just like there's an infinite amount of possibilities when it comes to homesteading, no matter what scale you're starting at, and it can be really overwhelming. And so the fastest way to get clear on that, like the definition of clarify, is to make clear by removing impurities. So it's actually a process of taking away stuff, of constraining down these infinite options to, if you think of like a Venn diagram with like 3 circles, it's one is, okay, what are all the things that you want, that you're really clear on that? And sometimes it's better to start with like, what do you clear you don't want? You know,
Yeah.
do you actually want to quit your job and try to make a full-time living from farming or homesteading? Because if you do or you don't, that's going to completely change your design.
Yep.
You know, when it comes to resources, it's like, do you have, you know, money in the bank in a big savings account, or do you have, you know, a bunch of student loans that you can never, you know, default on, and it's really hard for you to get credit? Did you grow up on a farm, or did you grow up in a city and you don't have a lot of that experiential capital that, you know, a lot of farm kids, including myself, take advantage? Like and this isn't a dig, but like I have some clients who didn't realize that garden hoses could be like connected together.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like, and like, again, that's not a dig at all. I
Right.
just, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And so like if you didn't grow up on a farm or doing this stuff, then, you know, just watching videos on YouTube or listening to podcasts and then thinking you can homestead would be equivalent to watching all of the seasons of Grey's Anatomy and thinking you could do brain surgery. That's not an exaggeration. It is that complex. It's not necessarily complicated. Like once you get the principles, it's a lot more intuitive than say brain surgery would be. But there's a lot of moving parts. So you know what resources you have is going to change. You know, your money, what equipment do you own or have access to? You know, your social capital. Do you live in a community of like-minded people, or are you, you know, moving out of the city to a place where you have no ties whatsoever? Those are very different things. And a lot of times I actually recommend, when people are looking to buy land, is forget about trying to buy land. You're trying to buy community. Because if you can buy the right community, you are decades ahead. And then, you know, I have different criteria I look at when I'm trying to buy land as well, but that's a big one that people miss.
Yeah.
You know, and then when it comes to your, you know, your values or what you think is right, I mean, generally this is a pretty simple one, but I think it's important for people to you know, explore those values. What are the myths, or the, you know, the cosmology, or the value systems that you were born and raised with, and do they actually still serve you, or are they actually holding you back? You know, a lot of people who get into the homesteading space are trying to run away from something, because there's a lot of terrible shit that's going on in the world right now. And, you know, if that's another paradigm that I see a lot, it's like, if you're trying to run away from something, you're going to fail. You got to get clear on what you're running towards, and I would actually say you want to walk towards it, because when you're running, you're running with scissors. There's chance for things to go wrong. And so getting clear on that, getting clear on, you know, all these beliefs that were pumped into us by our education system, or, you know, if you've gone through you know, a K-12 school, you've got about 10,000 hours of state funded propaganda that's been hammered into you. I guarantee that there are some values there that you don't actually want. And so, you know, really investigating those things. That's where I like to start. That's step one, is clarify your vision, values, and resources.
Yeah, I think mindset, the way you think about things, is huge. I know when I first started, it was, you know, you have an aim, you have something you want to accomplish, and then, but maybe it's bigger than what you think you can do, and maybe you just, you know, for one thing, just jumping in and doing things can be risky. It's a quick way to learn. You're going to make the mistakes like we talked about earlier, but, you know, knowing that you are capable of doing that means a lot. You know, if you have a mindset that says I can do this, it'll take you a long ways.
Yes.
If you're just always scared to try something, though, because you're just too afraid to fail, that can be a big problem too. I mean, again,
Absolutely.
overconfidence might be a little bit of a problem too if you
Totally.
jump into especially when it comes to animals, because then you're dealing with something that's a little more sensitive. Crops, fail. If you fail, you just plant again. But
Yeah.
animals are a little different, I think. But yeah, good stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's step number one. And then step number two is diagnose your resources for their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so when I talk about resources, this is your personal resources as well as your property's resources. So I already talked about, some of the, personal resources and what do you have, but that's sort of just like a list of those elements. But once you get clear on kind of, your what you have, what's right, and what you want, then you can start to kind of, okay, make subjective statements about those things, which is, okay, so I've got this skill set, or I've got this my land has these properties. Is that good or bad for my goals? Because it's all relative. Like if you want to graze, a couple dozen animals, whether it's sheep or dairy cows, and your property wants to be a wetland,
Mm-hmm.
that's not a good thing. You should say, and like I just had a client in Tennessee, had 500 acres, beautiful land, like unbelievable property. This is like $1 million property. He bought it with his family a few years ago, was living on site and like slowly developing stuff out. He put road and power, several $100,000s of infrastructure in. And in the first 2 hours of our consulting together, I was like, you got to sell this land, man. Like this is the complete wrong property for you based on what your goals are.
Wow.
Because, he wanted to be completely off grid. He wanted to have a lot of aquaculture systems. He wanted to be, really focused on resiliency and have like a lot of. He's a really smart guy and has a lot of resources, both financially and socially, social capital and skill sets and stuff like that. But he wanted a property that was going to have like basically zero limitations on it, because he didn't really know what he wanted to do, but he knew that he wanted to build this intergenerational legacy property that his kids were going to like build more homesteads on. And his land sadly wasn't developed to have gravity water, because there wasn't good catchments on it. There were no good wells in the area. He didn't have a year-round creek. There was lots of terrain and lots of forestry, but it was all spread out, and there's a lot of really steep land that kind of separated the flat areas. And so it was just going through our process, it was very clear. It's like, based on what you're saying you want, this multi-generational village, essentially, your land just isn't a fit for it. It's a beautiful property, but given your budget and your vision, values, and resources, we think you should sell this piece, and we'll help you find the right one will get you to where you want to go way faster. Even though he'd already put 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars into infrastructure, he ended up selling it. He got lucky and made basically more money than he put into it. And we haven't started looking for land for him yet, because he's still kind of letting the dust settle. This is really fresh for him, but that's the next step. And so that's actually a pretty common thing for people, is when we're doing consulting, is if they've already bought land, they haven't bought the best property for their goals, and sometimes they're just completely incompatible.
Well, and and that property might be a perfect homestead for somebody with a different vision.
So yeah, like if I told him, I said, if someone wanted to develop a hunting cabin, or a property that was perfect for, cabin on the hill, very simple, and it was just out in the middle of nowhere, you could still be totally self-sufficient, but it's more of a hunting property, perfect property. But he wanted to have, grazing systems, milk cows, aquaculture systems, in addition to the hunting, and like big greenhouses and like all this stuff. And it's just, you can do it, but it's going to be way more money. Like, again, like to have enough water for your family to flush toilets and, drink is one thing. If you want to start irrigating crops, like to put 12 inches of moisture or rain on an acre takes 330,000 gallons of water. It's a lot of water. And so if you want the ability to start doing, really intensive agriculture and be drought proof like that, it's a different context than if you just want to have a hunting property in a small garden. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's where the diagnosis and the vision and values piece is really really core.
I think when you're dealing with, I mean, to make a big distinction between homesteading and farming too, you can probably turn just about any property into a homestead that will supply
Yes.
your needs. But
Yeah.
if you're wanting to farm it and make money with it, it's
Yeah.
a lot bigger
Yeah.
process, a lot more investment.
Absolutely, yeah, and that is one of the clarifying questions that we get our clients to focus on. Is like, which direction are you going? Is it production? I'll actually, if you want to throw my my screen up there, we'll go through these. So this is a list of like the most key property goals that most of our clients have, is like some version of this. So there's, do you want to develop legacy? Are you looking for a profitable business? Is it personal resilience that's the driver? Are you looking for an investment hedge that you can, park some money in that's going to benefit you and kind of insulate you from the current global chaos in the financial systems? Is demonstration a really key part of your goals? Regenerating ecosystems for some of our clients, taking a burnt out property and getting it to come back to life is a major drive for why they're on a homestead. Or is it more quality of life for you and your family? And just, being able to, like one of my goals, I don't have a family right now, but like my kids will never wake up from an alarm clock to catch a school bus. Like they will never do that. And I'm going to build my whole life around that, because that's a core part of my vision. Purposeful work is another key piece for a lot of people. Community, aesthetics. So these are like our core property goals. And generally what we say is, okay, like what's your top 1 to 3? And everyone knows that. And then usually it's some mix of the other ones, but sometimes there's a few where it's like, no, I'm really not interested in this at all. I don't care about the investment piece. I'm never going to sell this. My kids are going to be here. But you can see how, if investment or community was the top goal, those are going to be very different designs.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you can throw the screen down there now and we'll come back. But yeah, so that's a big part of it. And then once you're clear on your vision, values, and resources, when we start diagnosing your property, there's 11 factors that I like to go through. And they're arranged in a hierarchy, not from most important to least important, but from most difficult to change to easiest to change. And that hierarchy goes from geography, climate, water, access, structures, fencing, flora, fauna, business, technology, and soil. And this is a framework that's based off of, there's several other guys that have similar frameworks. P.A. Yeomans came up with the first version of this. He called it the scale of permanence. He was the developer of keyline design and the keyline subsoiler plow. And there's other great guys like Richard Perkins and Darren Doherty. Bill Mollison had his own version of this as well. This is our framework that we use for diagnosing and designing land. But I like to think about this, I call it the order of operations, because it's if you remember back to grade 7 or 8 math class, we learned about algebra. There was an order of operations, and usually there was an acronym that was BEDMIS or HEDMIS for how to solve equations with different things in it. And it's parentheses, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction, and that's the order that you do them in. And if you don't solve the problem in order, you get the wrong answer. And land, I find, is the same way. And so we start by looking at your geography and your climate, because those are the hardest to change and they take the longest to change. So they're relatively fixed. And then we go through, water access structures. That's another kind of really core aspect of it. And then fencing, flora, fauna, and then business, technology, and soil. Those are the last 3. They're pretty flexible. And for technology, for example, it's like you can buy and sell a tractor in an afternoon. It's really easy. But if you buy a property that is in a rain shadow, or is in a tornado alley, or is in a valley that gets frosts that cuts your growing season 2 weeks shorter than a place just 5 miles down the road, that's something that's really hard to change. And so when we're diagnosing our property and our resources, we need to weight certain things heavier than others. And I find that framework really, really useful for that.
This is important, even if I feel like this is important, even if you're not buying a property. Say you have a property, but you just know what to expect. You go through this checklist, and you may be committed to not ever moving or buying a different piece of property. Even this might not be the ideal property, but at least you know what you're dealing with, and you know which steps are going to be the most important ones you're going to have to deal with first. So I think that's important as well.
Exactly. And another really simple example of that is when you're laying out, if you're buying raw land and you don't have, or even if you do, like most of the buildings, the roads, and the fences are put in the wrong place, right? Because all of that is dictated by our geography, and most people don't have an understanding of how hydrology and microclimates work. And so, like, generally when I'm looking at diagnosing a property, my favorite thing is when there is either no roads or buildings or fences on it, or they're in such terrible condition they're tear downs, because then it's like you don't even have to think about it. But when you're buying a property and a significant value of the property is attributed to the buildings and the roads and the infrastructure, you can't just tear that stuff down, unless you've got a lot of resources, which again most people don't have. But even in that case, you'd be better off rather than just pouring money, and lighting it on fire. You should just sell it to someone else who values those things the way they are and buy a better one. So yeah, it's again, we've covered a lot before we've even got into the conversation of design, of like, how do we actually put that together? But the way that I like to look at it is, being clear on what you want and having a clear diagnosis on that is like 80% of the work of design. Once you've done all that heavy lifting, the design is so easy. Things just like click together. And so, yeah, the process that I, wrote the book on and that we use in our design company is based on this. And then, so we'll spend 3 or 4 weeks with clients before I even think about where I'm going to put stuff. And it's all just asking questions, figuring out where all the existing infrastructure is, doing all that research. And then usually it's about, a day where my team and I sit down and we just pull all these data points up, and it's like a connect the dots puzzle. And the design literally just jumps off the page, and it's like, oh yeah, of course it has to be this way. But if you hadn't done all that previous work, it's so daunting to try. Where do I put my garden? Where do I put my infrastructure? And when should I get animals? And it's like, but when you come back to this framework, it's like, well, first of all, you shouldn't even be thinking about animals until you've got your fence structures, access, and water in place. That's another common mistake I see is people buy property and the first thing they do is buy animals. And it's just so much more work to do it that way. Again, you can, but I know a lot of clients and acquaintances in the homesteading business that did that, and they burn out, and then 2 years later they have go on a sabbatical to try to recover.
I think a lot of people are just so anxious to get a property being a producer for them in some way, either for themselves or for other people, and they're just anxious to get it going so they can actually get some resources and develop.
But that's where it really is this, slow and steady is what wins the race. And like, I'll give you another example. So when I first moved back to the farm, the first thing I did was plant, it was probably like $30,000-$40,000 of the fruit trees. And pretty much all of them died in the first 2 to 3 years. And it just literally I just lit $40,000 on fire.
Wow.
And not to mention all the work and labor and stuff that went into that, because the goal was, well, the sooner I plant an apple tree, the sooner I'm going to have fruit, right? And so I put a lot of work into, and I put a lot of thought into this. This wasn't like just a off the cuff thing, but in a combination of not having the right water infrastructure in place, not having protection from deer, not having the right microclimates established, not having the right soil conditions for a climax plant to live. Like you can't just go put this this Goldilocks type plant in clay. I think it's going to do well. You have to develop. So now my thought is, it's not the sooner you plant an apple tree, the sooner you'll get apples. It's the sooner you create the conditions for an apple tree to thrive.
And you probably have to go that extra little bit to get conditions right because of where you live,
yeah,
because you're probably right on the edge of where you can grow those things anyway.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like some people in the world, you literally can't just go and throw an apple core out in the bush, and 5 years later you come back and there's an apple tree there. We're not there, but even still, like you'll still get, even in those situations, you'll still get there faster if you develop these conditions for an apple tree to thrive.
Right.
And so now, like, I've done some more videos on like the more recent fruit forests that I've planted. I've had more growth on some of my fruit trees in a single season than I've had in 5 years in previous food forests that I've planted, just because I got the conditions right.
Yeah.
And so, like, I literally, if I would have done nothing 5 years except focus on creating the conditions, then in the fourth year planted an apple tree, I would have been faster and further ahead than doing the other stuff that I'd done before.
I've noticed that on my property as well. I think about some of the earliest guilds I put in, and they were just really slow at developing because the soil wasn't quite there. I didn't have any swells around them. I just planted some stuff and let it kind of, you're thinking, oh, it's symbiotic relationships, it'll just work together and succeed, when I didn't actually put in any of the other stuff around it that really needed to thrive. And now when I put one in and it's already got some of that stuff around it, it just, boom, it's up. And the next year it's just blowing up. And it's just so much better.
Yeah, totally. And so I really do think slow and steady is the race, and animals are the same thing. Like, I've got videos on my YouTube channel of me, milking 2 cows, feeding 30 pigs, and looking after chickens while I'm leading a tour and processing all the milk and done in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And like, I talk to other farmers who it's like their chores that I do in an hour and a half takes them all day. And so that's another example of, like, when you create these systems, you get the water, the access, the structures, the fencing, and the flora in place, and then you buy the animals. It's effortless, and then it is profitable and productive and fun, and you can still do other things. But if you get it wrong, now that chore that should have taken you a few minutes takes you a couple hours, and you're on this hamster wheel. And you can't just forget to milk the milk cow one day, or forget to feed the chickens. Like, you don't get a break from those things. You can forget to water your garden, but it's a lot higher stakes with animals. So it is a slow and steady thing when it comes to the design and the development of these things. But again, that's where a lot of my focus is on clarifying, diagnosing, then the design comes together. Then step 4 is implementation, which is, okay, where are we going to start? And this is really relative. It's generally what I recommend for clients is, what's your weak link? What's the thing that's most negatively impacting your quality of life or your profitability or whatever your core goal is? Start there, because the sooner you move the needle on that issue, the sooner everything else is better in your life, and the more resources and time and energy are freed up to do the next weak link. And so that's the subjective piece. Now, part of that, I also encourage that order of operations, where, again, don't buy milk cows until you've got stanchions and shelters and waterers and stuff set up. But the implementation really comes down to what's your weakest link and what are you most motivated to solve? Let's start with that piece. And I encourage people to specialize before they diversify. So, there's something I call the 6 B's of homesteading. And it's, there's businesses, babies, brides, businesses, bushes, and beasts. And so generally when someone gets a homestead, they're starting a new business. They just got married. They're having a kid. They start building a new house or a new barn or something. They plant a bunch of trees. They get 2 or 3 species of animals. They have and shit just blows up because it's too much. And so, but if you were to specialize on 1 or 2 of those per season, you'd get to your goal faster than if you try to do it all. You can't make that many mistakes.
Yeah, I always tell people to don't do it like I do it.
No, it's too much.
I got bad habits.
And you'll be in a much better mood because it's fun then. And I did all of those things the wrong way. I moved back to the farm and got everything. Luckily, I wasn't married and didn't have kids or anything, because that would have really done me in. But it's still really, really stressful, and it's sad because I see that it's a really common mistake for a lot of homesteaders to get into the spaces. They're so excited, they see the farms that have been there, for decades, and I just want that, and they forget that, well, that took a decade or two to build.
Yeah.
And again, there's ways to speed it up, but it's still a slow process.
Yeah, I focus on, the things that are most important to you. I mean, just get those out of the way first. And, if you want, if you want to produce meat off your homestead, I mean, yeah, you can definitely hit that more than the garden in the beginning. But again, slow. You don't want to overdo it and take on too much. But just figure out the thing that's going to mean the most. If you're really in it for health and you want to produce something just for your homestead, I think there's things you can do to bring in a little bit of that, so it can start supplying for you, before you start maybe creating a farm that provides for other people, and also give you some experience as well, going slow.
So another framework that I talk about in the book that I think is really useful is something I call the birdshot or the buckshot approach. So, it's birdshot, buckshot, and slug.
Yeah.
So basically, I got the story from a friend of Ontario who, when he was a kid, he used to go pick blueberries in the wild in burn areas, and there was always a lot of bears around. And so the way they would load their shotguns for protection was slug, buckshot or birdshot, and then slug, buckshot, slug, so that if they got charged by a bear and they were scared and they missed the first shot, that was just this one big thing that would kill a bear. But if it misses, you're hooped. Next one was going to be this broad, scattered, small thing that would at least slow the bear down before you could load again and get the next slug, and just kind of alternate that. And I thought that's basically what I advocate when it comes to implementation, is do that kind of so what's your what's your wildly important goal, or what's your weakest link, the thing that you most need to focus on, and then you'll spend a lot more time and energy. Those are your slugs, where it's like, we got to knock it out of the park. But then in the meantime, you also want to have some little experiments that you're kind of running in the background. And those experiments, I say, is like, run as many of those as you can manage that take less than an hour of your time, or the equivalent of your hourly wage. And when you think about it like that, it really scales down the trials that you can do. They need to be really like quick and dirty trial and error things. And if you do that the first, so I'll give you an example, is like, when I moved to my new homestead here that I'm developing now, the first year, even though it's close to my existing farm, the soils are different, the climate's a little bit different, and so I had to run a lot of those trials over again. So what does it look like? Well, in my garden for the first year, I wasn't focused on being self-sufficient, because I go, no, you're not going to do that in the first year. Instead, I focused on, okay, what are the varieties that I want to trial, so I can figure out the main crop I'm going to grow next year. So you might start out with a half dozen or a dozen varieties of one thing for the first year, which doesn't take a lot of time or energy. But then you pick the winner, or the one or two varieties of garlic or peas or pole beans, squash, seem to do really well in your soil, your climate. And then the next year, okay, great, now you do those. Or if you're doing cover crops, we went from planting dozens of varieties of cover crops in our gardens or in our pastures or in our cropland, to now we've got like 5 or 6 that we know that if I put them out, they're going to grow, but other ones just don't work. I've got other clients that are literally a few hours away from me, and it's the exact opposite. Like, the species that won't grow where I am, they do great over there. So running you'll run these experiments in such a way that when they fail, you're excited, right? And you're purposely designing them to, like, I know that of the 10 things I'm doing, only one of them is going to work, and that's great, because that's what's going to happen. And when you design them that way, so that they're small enough, and there's few of them enough that you can make mistakes and actually learn from them, it's different than when they start to be these, I call it the opposite, is like the bazooka approach, or everything that you do is just this, giant missile that you're putting all this energy and resources towards. And yeah, sometimes you knock it out of the park, but more often than not, you're taking shots in the dark and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, you speed up that failure process. It speeds up the learning process, and
Yeah.
ultimately success. Because if you can just kind of, like you said, kind of split it up there and see what's going to work and what isn't going to work all at once, and figure it out. Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. I was looking for your book behind me. I know I got it back here on my shelf somewhere.
I guess, yeah, I see her there in the orange, right in the center, I think.
Yeah, no, that's not. That's a different one.
Oh,
I don't know. It's up here somewhere.
yeah.
It's up there somewhere. I don't know. That's the one you had with Rob Avis, right? That was that book.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah. I got it somewhere up there. I don't know where it's at. Oh, right here. Yeah.
There you go. It's sideways here. Yeah.
You've seen it. Yeah. That's the book. If anybody wants to look that up, it's Building Your Permaculture Property. It's a great book. I've had it for since it very first came out.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of great stuff in it.
Yeah. And so the other thing that I like is like, this is a framework that Bill Mollison developed, which is similar to that kind of birdshot and buckshot, but it's spread out over a couple years. And I believe he wrote an article in like the 80s. It was called like the four stages of abundance, or the 4 years to abundance or something. But it was basically that same idea. Is like the first year when you get to your homestead is all about variety trials. And so you're planting, dozens of every variety, whether it's apples or pears or plums or cabbages or beans, doesn't matter. You're doing dozens of things. And then the next year, half of those are going to die, or they're just not going to do very well. And so, then those get called out. And then by year, 3, you've got like an abundance of propagation material. And so now it's the things that were working, you can save seed, you can take cuttings, you can learn from those mistakes. And then in year 4, that's when you kind of expand out and you get big. And so it's like everyone wants to get there really fast and have that, but it's a slow process. Your property really, it takes time for you to learn the intricacies of your climate, your soil, your geography, all those different things. And so to slow things down and to start in your inner zones and work out, right? So you're starting right around your center of operation, which is your house. And then you're running these trials in your experimental, laboratory, which is right within 20 steps of your front door in any direction. Ideally, it's really in tight so that you can make those observations for the first couple of years. And then every year you kind of expand your circle out. And so you might start with raised beds or cold frames right around the house. And then the next year it might be, your kitchen garden, and then maybe your main crop garden, and, then your pastures and, wood lots. Again, you can be doing more than one experiment at a time, but that's a general principle is slow and small.
And the money you can save doing that too is amazing by going slow and expanding it, letting it expand itself. Like I remember, like on my property, I started with like 3 comfrey root cuttings years ago, and now I've got hundreds of those on my property. Elderberry, I think I started with 3 elderberry bushes, and I got hundreds of them on my property now. It's just because and it didn't cost me anything extra because I just took my own cuttings, I propagated, I expanded, and it took a little bit of time, but it didn't cost me anything.
Exactly. I did the same thing. The first permaculture course I took, I brought one of like every plant from that farm back, and that was we're back in 2012. And when I started my new food forest, like I literally put in like 1,000 comfrey cuttings, and it took me an afternoon to dig them up. It would have been several $1,000s to do that.
Yeah. And it goes for like even livestock. I mean, if you plant the things that are going to feed that livestock first and then bring in the livestock, you saved a ton of it because you bring them both in at the same time. Now you got these young trees or young plants that are going to take some time to develop. Now you're going to have to bring in feed for those animals, waiting for the other stuff to grow so you can feed them. But if you grow the one first, if you do it in the right order, it didn't cost you anything. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even, starting with, smaller and faster animals. Like before you get the milk cow, get some meat birds, because you got them for 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks max. And they're still going to build your soil. They're still going to, build pastures and stuff for when your milk cows come, but you're only tied down for 10 weeks, but you're going to learn so much in that trial rather than going and getting a milk. Like a milk cow is like just one step down from a wife.
I'm glad I didn't say that. I'll put that on you. You don't want one anytime soon, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, just the amount of time and energy and
Yeah.
like they're, um, like they're very, yeah. You want to spend the time to get it right, because if otherwise your life's a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, and just the work it takes and the feed it takes and just
Yeah,
everything. Like I can take like you were talking about smaller livestock, I can take a dozen meat rabbits and feed them for a whole summer off of one mulberry tree, you
exactly. Yeah,
know,
yeah,
or get something huge that you don't have the feed for that you're gonna have to bring in all that input,
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Or another one that I try to encourage people, like, if you are going to get bigger animals, like, say, cows, uh, get some stalkers, get some yearlings. Get them in the spring when the grass comes, and then harvest them in the fall.
Yep.
To have the infrastructure to be breeding your own animals is very, like, I still don't have my own breeding program for my pigs, right? Or
Mhm.
like, I breed my own sows on farm, but I don't save my own boars. Every year
Yep.
I buy a new boar in, because it's easier for me to just keep them for a month, sell them to someone else, or harvest them for dog food, and then I don't have to have that separate pen for him for 12 months and worry about all that complexity. And I'm likely never going to do that, because it just makes my life so much easier. And you could do the same thing with beef animals. For the first 5 or 6 years, we just rent a bull off of somebody rather than have our own, until we had the infrastructure to handle it.
Growing up, every year, I remember my parents, they just get two or three, we call them feeder pigs. You
Yes.
just get a couple, two or three pigs in the spring, feed them all and harvest them in the fall. And that's your
Yeah,
meat for the winter, and
exactly. Yeah.
we did that every
Yeah.
year.
And
Yeah.
that's the way to start first, is like, it would be,
Hmm.
meat chicken or meat rabbits, and then pigs, and then maybe some yearling, feeder cows, or finishers, and then maybe you get into a milk cow or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the milk is that's the last things you want to bring in, because they are, if when it goes right, they're amazing. But if you don't have the right systems and they start getting mastitis and they're stressed, you can spend, hundreds of hours to basically get zero milk, just to keep the thing from, suffering.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've done it, and it's not worth it. But now, I can basically train, I have a farmhand that runs, farm basically now, and I can train someone in a couple weeks to run everything on my farm now. And he can just give me a call whenever he needs help, and that's it. But that's because we've spent the time and effort to develop these systems, so that, someone with zero experience can come in and do it. Which is another thing. The, the you know that that I've never really run into this, because I've got the family support system. Like, I farm with my parents. I've got my sisters live down the road, and so we've never had this issue. But there's a couple people that I know of just the last few years, where there's a family emergency, someone dies, and they need to leave the homestead, and they can't. Like, and
Right.
they never thought about it, because they didn't develop. They have no backup person to do the chores, or it's so complicated that they couldn't possibly explain it. And it has led to a lot of stress. And again, I never thought about that, because we've just never had to deal with that in our life. But now it's like a really common thing, is you need to design your farm that's simple enough that a 12-year-old could run it, so that
Hmm.
if something ever happens, you can explain it to a 24 or a 30-year-old over the phone, and he'll get it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, you're trapped.
And just growing, if you live in a farming community, everybody knows how to do it, and your neighbors can always help you. I grew up in that kind of a community, and I guarantee you,
Yeah,
the like 13-year-olds down the street could probably run your farm just as good as you, because they
yeah,
just grew
yeah,
up doing that. And
totally.
if you
Yeah,
need to go away for a week, you just hire them to come over and do your things for you. While and you can do
yeah,
that. But if you're right, if you're in a place where you don't have that, that becomes a thing. It's something you have to really put some
yeah,
thought into and try to figure out.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
So what's
Yeah.
next in this design, in this implementation?
So the fifth and final step, I call it, manager monitor, which is kind of a nuanced, uh, subject to get into. But essentially, this is all about how to think about your interaction with your homestead, where you're monitoring for two things, whether it's your personal resources, your animals, your soil health, your profitability, your other family members, your community, is you're trying to observe for, monitor for suffering and well-being.
Mm.
And so the way I like to look at it is suffering is feedback for bad design, and well-being or thriving is feedback for good design. And so, or the way I like to phrase it is, drudgery is punishment for stupidity. If you're doing something that sucks, it's because you're stupid. And the number of times that I've said that to myself, where I'm doing something and it's like, this sucks. And then the next thought is, that's because I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I've took on some bad advice that caused that as well too.
Yeah.
People just, you hear people talk about something and you say, well, okay, that makes a lot of sense. You try it and then it isn't what they said it was. I've had that happen a few times.
Totally. And so when you start to look at that as like your whole life, that simple framework, again, whether you're monitoring your soil or your animals, your chickens, your milk cow, your family, your kids, just like, are they thriving or is they suffering? Is it moving in a place where, man, every day I'm more excited to get up, or does it feel like I'm losing ground? And just really paying attention to those two things in all aspects of your life, and looking at them as like early warning indicators. They're the canary in the coal mine. That's going to be the first thing that'll let you know that things are starting to go off the rails. And when you monitor those things, you can so easily make preemptive changes, and then it's again, that's feedback for design, and it makes your designs better. Versus there's kind of in farming and in some of the homesteading world as well. It's not so much in homesteading, but in farming, there's this mentality of like, if you ain't bleeding, you ain't working. Right? And there's like a love of the grind. There's a love of the suffering. That there's something virtuous and in itself good for just doing things that suck.
It feels good to put in a hard day's work, but after several weeks or months of it, sometimes it doesn't feel so good.
but there's a difference between work and drudgery.
Right.
And so I love, like, one of the most meaningful moments in my life have come after putting in a hard day's work, walking back to the house and looking back as the sun set. There's nothing more just beautiful than that. But that's different than when you spent 10 hours pushing a rock up a hill only for it to roll back right lower than it was the day before, and to have to do that every day for the rest of your life. I call that that's the Sisyphean task, right? It's laborious and futile. And so again, there's a difference between work and drudgery, and so drudgery is that it's work that's laborious and futile. It's just suffering. There's no point to it.
Right.
And when you start to distinguish with those things, it transforms your life, and you start to see this stuff everywhere.
And design can, bad design can lead to unnecessary work. I'm thinking right now of, you're talking about, drudgery and things and suffering. It doesn't necessarily have to be that element itself that's suffering. It can be you that's suffering in your labors. I'm thinking of I put, I always wanted, as a permaculture guy, I'm looking to expand all these permaculture plants. You hear about goji berry. Man, I want some goji berry.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Goji berry are awesome. Be careful where you plant them.
Yeah.
Because I planted some right beside my house, and they're trying to take over the world right there. They wanted to take up the whole side of my house, and they're climbing up everything, and they're not getting behind boards in my house and breaking boards loose. And it's just completely unnecessary because I did a bad design.
Yes.
Those needed to be somewhere else. So that's a big mistake.
Exactly. And it's the same thing where, I tell the story in the book, and I've told the other videos and stuff, but I figured out why my milk cows were getting mastitis through that metric of suffering and well-being. And eventually I realized that mastitis isn't a lack of iodine or antibiotics or any of these chemicals. It's caused by the emotional stress of being separated from their calves. And when I changed that in my system, because I struggled for years because I couldn't figure out what it was, but there was only one pasture where my cows got mastitis on. And it was because from that pasture, they couldn't go and touch noses at night with their calves. Every other pasture I had, they could. It was a design fluke. I know I designed my system to have that. I didn't realize how important it was. And so for one pasture, it just didn't work out. I wasn't worried about it. But every year for 3 or 4 years, they were getting mastitis. It took me a while before I realized it was only in this pasture, and when they were gone, it went away. I thought I was curing it with, apple cider vinegar and molasses and garlic. No, they got to be reconnected with their calf at night again, and it disappeared. When I changed that, I haven't had mastitis since.
That's
And
amazing.
so, it's that same thing, or like the relationship with my parents. Like we used to fight over, a $20 bill, who's going to pay for it? And now, like, we'll settle $20,000-$30,000 tabs and have coffee afterwards, and it's awesome, right? And like, I never would have thought that was possible until I really honed in on these. Like, what are the aspects of life that sucks? Not that they're hard, but just, like, there's no point to it, and it's just needless suffering. Whether that's my dairy cows, weeds in my garden, my chickens being afraid of certain parts of the farm, and I'm trying to force them to go out there, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, how do I address this with design so that there isn't that feeling of having to force function things, or it's suffering for me or something else.
Right.
And now those are, so with those two things, suffering and well-being, if you monitor those for all aspects of your life, that's it. Like, your life will keep getting better. And like, I'm still making tweaks to my milking system after I've milked cows pretty much every day for, was it 12 years now? The same system, and just every couple of weeks I tweak something, because it's like, oh, if I just move this here, if I change that gate this way, the cows wouldn't get all jammed up there, and then they wouldn't fight each other. And you just keep doing that and doing that, and it's that way. Even if you're doing things that, now I've got resources on how to design the perfect milking system, but to even when it wasn't ideal 10 years ago when I was first starting out, the fact that I was able to make incremental changes every day and I saw improvement, that kept me going. So it's like, there's a quote in our book we talk about. It's by an architect named Bruce Mao, and he says, when outcome is the driver, you can only go to where you've already been. But when process is the driver, you may not know where you're going, but you'll know you want to be there. And so that's what this, like, the suffering and well-being and the whole other process that I built is all around. That is like, I have no idea where we're going, but I know day by day, you're getting constant feedback that I'm heading in the right direction. And that I know that wherever it is we're going, I'm going to want to be there.
I think one of the places I see this most often being an issue on homesteads is in chicken coop design.
Yeah.
I see where they can't keep it clean as easily. And so you cause some problems. The chickens get breathing issues. You just have this constant struggle trying to keep them healthy because of poor design. And I think I see that probably more, just what I'm thinking. It seems like something I see the most often.
Absolutely. And it turns into this, the fable of the woman who swallowed the fly, and then she had to swallow the spider, and then she had to swallow the mouse. And before she's swallowing horses and she's dead, right? It's just this snowballing effect of the prescription causing more side effects, and versus when you get to the root cause of it, which is, like mastitis would be a great example, or the chicken coop. It really comes down to, if it sucks to clean your chicken coop, if you hate it, your chickens will have diseases. I guarantee it, because you won't clean it as often. You won't use as much straw as you need to use. And you'll try to cut corners, and then that'll just snowball. And so, like for our coop, the coop, or the perches are on hinges, right? Everything is at full height so that I can walk in there and I'm not scrunching down. It's well lit, it's well ventilated. And I've designed systems so that I want to clean my chicken coop, because that's the day that I don't need to feed my pigs, because they're getting all this extra resources, or it's going straight onto our garden, or whatever. Like, there's a reason to do it. And so even though it sucks, like it's not, fun, it's work, but there's a purpose behind it. And that changes everything. And then I've made it such a way that it's really good. But if I was to go back and design a chicken coop again, it'd be totally different. It would be a hoop house with, those Illuma coops that you can rotate around in the wintertime. That's my ideal system now. I'll be building it on my new place this year. Joel Salatin keeps his chickens in greenhouses in the winter. Richard Perkins does. There's lots of great, systems that have already been prototyped for that. But the core difference, I think, for me is I want to be able to have the same infrastructure summer and winter. And so all I got to do is open the door and pull my chicken coop from inside the greenhouse to outside. And that's the start of my season. I didn't have to change, moving the coops or the roosts or the nest boxes around. So yeah, that's the kind of system that I'm looking at developing now. And then you can do fruit trees and stuff inside and rotate them around even in the wintertime. And yeah,
for folks thinking about on a smaller scale, like what I do, I raise quail, Turks quail, and rabbits. And I went in and, for the first few years, it was a nightmare trying to get in that area and clean everything and shovel everything out from beneath the cages. And so I put these removable boxes underneath there. Now it's just walk in, grab it. I also want to do it because one of the resources I need a lot of on my property is compost. Don't ever have enough compost. So I'm always anxious to get in there, get that out, get it in the compost pile, produce more compost, get it on my garden. So it's like, and it makes it just such an easy process. Go in there, grab them, dump them, produce. Exactly. And it just makes it easy and convenient and not a miserable task. And that's important.
It is. And I tell every farmhand I've ever had, it's like, if I ever ask you to do something and you think in your mind, this sucks, I want you to call me immediately. Because you're either doing it wrong and you didn't understand what I'm asking you to do, or the system I built can be improved and you've had an insight that didn't bother me. And so like, those are the most valuable things. It's just you catch yourself like, this sucks. It's like, great, that's an opportunity. Permaculture, it's how do we turn this problem into the solution, right?
Right.
And it lives in those moments of observing suffering. Because I truly believe that those two emotions or sensations are literally hardwired into all organisms. That's what drives evolution. Is this survival or thriving or suffering? Is it, whether it's wild animals or anything else? It's this constant effort to, how do I evolve or adapt or just leave this environment because it's not working for me? And we as humans have just built these prisons for ourselves, and we get caught in this stuff, and it's not necessary.
When you said that, I was thinking, okay, what things suck, traditionally on a homestead? And I'm thinking pulling weeds. Well, you can fix that in a couple ways. You can either grow more intense in your garden beds to where weeds don't even have a place to grow, or you can put a lot of mulch down, and that also serves some great purposes. And again, you eliminate that thing you hate to do by doing something better.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I've got videos on my YouTube channel of how, we grow cover crops right next to where my crop is. And I'm just scything a cover crop, and that's using it as mulch. And it's just simple needs and yield stuff, but it's a total game changer. And so, or like the same thing with the weeds. I've got another client in the tropics right now. I've never grown in the tropics. I have no experience. I've never even been to the tropics yet, because ecosystems are the same everywhere. They're struggling with certain weeds. And my first thing is, okay, I want you to, do some research on that weed. I want you to understand what's its root structure look like? What is it used? Does it have any medicinal uses historically? What plant family is it in? The kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is, you want to figure out not the genus or species, but the family. And then you might look at the shape of it, and what your goal is, like, what is it trying to do in this ecosystem? Because there's a reason it's growing there, it's thriving. Sometimes just like any plant will grow just about anywhere, but if there's one plant that's like taking over and there's a problem with it, great, figure out what it's trying to do, what imbalance is trying to correct in the ecosystem, and then find a way to help it do that. Whether that's managing that particular plant, whether that's bringing in an analog species. So this particular client was really struggling with, it's a plant called Spanish clover, and it has like really nasty burrs on it, and it was getting in her dog's hair, and it was just a total nightmare. And she, to the point where she couldn't even walk her dog outside. And so we did some research on this. It's like, oh, try this kind of a clover and maybe some vetch and like a few of these things. Threw them out there, and now those plants are taking over that niche in the ecosystem, and that Spanish clover, with just some minor management, isn't an issue anymore. And it's the same process no matter what weed you're dealing with.
I need to work through this process with morning glories because they want to take over my property.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I'm not really familiar with that one, but that would be the the general process is figure out what it's trying to do in the ecosystem, because there's a reason that it's thriving, and then either help it do that or find something else that you actually want to grow that will achieve the same purpose. And
Good stuff. Yeah.
then you will have to do some management, whether that's cutting it at a certain time but as soon as nature abhors a vacuum. If you try to fight that plant, you're not going to win. Right? We're not going to go head to head with the most powerful force in the universe.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what I do. I can pull them things all day long and they just pop right back up.
Totally.
What's next in this process here?
Then it's just rinse, repeat, and it's this ongoing iterative cycle of, okay, so you've clarified, what you want, what you have, what's right. You've diagnosed your resources for their strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. You've created a design that bridges the gap between, where you are and where you want to go. You've had this implementation strategy that was, focusing on your, weakest links, but also running little experiments. And while you're doing all that, you're constantly monitoring for suffering and well-being. And you just do this over and over again. And you constantly get clear on what you actually want and what's important to you. And then you have more insights about, the state of your current resources and how they're actually helping you or hindering you. And you have more design ideas, and then you have to develop a new implementation strategy, and it never stops. And it's this, I call it the upward spiral, where you're constantly moving towards, again, this place that you have no idea where it's going to be, but you want to be there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, where do you want to take us next there, Takota? You got something else you want to introduce us to?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm trying to think, where do you want to focus on? Is it more, gardening, or like looking at buying the right property? What do you think would be most valuable to?
I think now there are a lot of people that listen to the podcast who are just getting started and probably looking for a property, but I think most of the people that we're probably talking to are homesteaders. And because they listen to this podcast, they probably, are familiar with permaculture, and, they want they think about regenerative agriculture and implementing these things on our property. I think, how do most people take a standard homestead? We're growing a garden. We have maybe some chickens. Okay. What are some steps we can take to start really implementing things that, practically speaking, that we can do on our property to, I guess maybe why we want to introduce it, what would make it better having that, and how to maybe take some steps into that.
Yeah. So there's something I call the 5 rules of permaculture design, which get into a little bit more of the details of when you're actually designing a system. And so these 5 rules can be thought of as 5 words. So there's synergy, adaptive, optimization, anti-fragile, and ethical. And so we can go through each of those kind of 5 rules. And the goal is, like, you're trying to create these systems that are synergetic. So, that where every need and yield of every element is provided by and put to productive use within the system. So this is the basic needs and yields analysis that's so common in, every permaculture course has this, where, the classic example is the chicken. What does the chicken need? What does the chicken provide? How do you connect that up with other elements like gardens, food forests, where they can facilitate their own needs and yields without you having to do a bunch of work? So that's this idea of 1 + 1 = 10, right? Yeah. Whereas most homesteads, they're a diversity of monocultures, right? So they have the chickens and the pigs and the gardens and the food forests and this
all
and
separate.
And they're all separate. They're all monocultures, but there's a lot of diversity, but there's no connections. And so permaculture it's not about the elements, it's about the relationships. And so when you're thinking about design, literally create a list of what are all the elements that you have, the plants, animals, and structures. What are all of their needs and yields? And literally write this stuff out, either on a piece of paper or in a slideshow, or however you like to work. And then your brain will literally start, well, if I moved this thing over here, then those 2 needs and yields would cancel each other out. Or if I change this management program, and your brain will just start lighting up, and it's so much fun to do this.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Is it's all about synergy. The second rule is about creating adaptive systems. And so the goal here is that every element must serve multiple functions, and every function must be provided by multiple elements.
Mm-hmm.
So you might also think of this as like redundancy, or there's a saying in the kind of prepper world where 2 is 1 and 1 is none,
Yep.
right? And so that's the one aspect of having these adaptive systems, is that think of, so we've added another idea in here, which is so there's elements, plants, animals, and structures, and then there's functions. And so the functions are, what are the things that your homestead needs to provide for you? Food, water, shelter, energy, leisure. Maybe there's some other, maybe there's a wealth aspect of that too, right? Those are the functions.
Security. Yeah.
Security, yeah, right? So making a list of those functions, great. Now, what are all the ways that you get water on your farm? What are all the ways you provide food? What are all the ways that you have shelter or energy? And is there only one element that provides each of those functions? Because if it is, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. It's not a very resilient system. And so how do we add more, change the design so that there's more elements that provide the same functions, but then also each element itself should provide multiple functions. So a pond should not just provide water. A pond should also provide wildlife habitat. Maybe there's a microclimate effect that you can have. Maybe you can skate on it in the wintertime to play hockey. Maybe you can use it as an ice bath when you jump out of your sauna. Maybe you can have fish in there. Maybe it's, one of the ponds at our place, it's positioned strategically as a stormwater retention pond. It also captures the runoff from our corrals to grow duckweed, which we feed back to our animals.
Yeah.
But that pond also is centered within all of our infrastructure, so that within a 200 or 300-foot hose, I can use a fire pump for fire management. So that one pond does all those things, and that's one single element. But because it was designed specifically to do that, it's multifunctionality, and it's adaptive. So that's the second kind of key rule is we want to create these synergistic systems where the sum of the part, or the sum is greater than its parts. These adaptive systems, which are, again, it's all about multifunctionality. And then the third one is optimization. And so this is all about energy flows inside and outside the system are iteratively optimized. So this is an ongoing process. And I would also say, like, all of these words that I'm talking about are they're not destinations, they're a journey. Right? Like you're never going to have you're never going to have a perfectly synergized homestead. You're never going to have a perfectly adapted homestead. It's all about creating synergistic and optimizing. It's a process, right? So that's really key. But when we think about optimizing it, there's 2 other frameworks in permaculture which are really key. One of them is zones. So this is typically, there's 5. So you might have your house, and then zone 1, which is basically within 20 feet of your front door, or 20 foot from your house. Then your zone 2 is kind of like the next area, which is usually like a quarter acre. So you might think of it as like, 1,000 square feet, a quarter acre. And then zone 3 might be a few acres. Zone 4 might be tens of acres. And zone 5 would be areas that you go to, less than that. And the size isn't so important. You could also think about it as, so zone 1 is you go there multiple times per day.
Yeah.
Zone 2 is you might go there multiple times per week, and then it's multiple times per month. In zone 3, multiple times per year, and then maybe it's like once a year as you go further out. So the things that you need the most often, or that they need you the most, you put closer to your center of operation. And the opposite's true as well. So that's what zones is all about. It's all about optimizing your energy in the system.
Yep.
And if you want to think about this in a mathematic way, the relationship between the radius of a circle and its area is exponential, right? The formula is it's not a linear progression. every step that you take away from the center of your operation, your house, there is an exponential amount of area that you have to manage and think about.
Yeah.
And then that's just in a two-dimensional. You start thinking about that in terms of 3D and then 4D in terms of time, and you can see why. Oh, that thing's the garden's only 100 feet away. You'll never go to it. Bill Mawson said is like if your kitchen garden, if you have to harvest your breakfast and you have to get your slippers wet to harvest your breakfast, your garden's too far away.
Yeah. And it doesn't even necessarily mean, like you said, I like the idea of how often you visit it even more than distance, because like on my own property here, just for as an example, I walk out the back door and I go 2 different directions and I have main garden, but there's an area beside my house that I have to turn and go up that I almost never do that. I almost never go up right beside my house there, but I have stuff growing up through there. And yet that's a further zone, because even though it's closer to my house, because I don't frequently visit that section right there. So it doesn't, so I like the idea of how often you visit it even better.
Yeah, that's really key, is that these aren't concentric circles either. And they're like, we talk about our chore path a lot, which is like, what's the path that you walk multiple times a day, whether it's to do your, milk the cow or feed the chickens, or go to the garage to jump on your vehicle to commute. For some people, that might be that's your most walked area on your farm that you have to, what else can you stack along that so that you've got raised beds and all these things. I like to call it the grocery store aisle.
Yeah.
It's like you're literally walking through grocery store aisles of food on your way. And just like in a grocery store, all the dairy and the meat and all the good stuff's at the back of the grocery store. So that's typically how your homestead is that stuff's, farthest away, because there's reasons for that, of just, noise and just the amount of space that they need. But on your path to that, you're walking through, raised beds, your kitchen garden, food forests.
And just thinking about how you'll utilize it too. I think about like a compost pile. When I first put in a compost pile years ago, I wanted it as far away from my house as I could get. I was like, I want to get that thing way out there. I don't have to worry about smell or, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking like along those lines.
Yeah.
But then when I found out was when I had all these scraps in the kitchen, I didn't want to take them all the way out there. They ended up going in the trash can because it was too far away. It wasn't convenient. So I had to bring that in a little bit, still out of the way a little bit, but enough to where I was going to go to it every day.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's a great example of that, suffering being feedback for bad design, and then you change it.
Yeah.
Another framework that I use is like, think about your, like the work triangle in your kitchen, just how close your fridge, your stove, and your sink is together in your kitchen. And there's like really, core design principles that every kitchen's laid out like that. And it's like, now I want you to imagine putting one of those elements in the basement of your house.
Yeah.
You wouldn't cook.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's only an extra 50 steps, right? Like, it's not a long distance, but it's a mental thing. People know when their life energy is being wasted, and the physiological response to that is this procrastination and drudgery and just this feeling of this sucks.
Yeah.
And so it's like, pay attention to those evolutionary signals, because they're really important. That's the idea behind zones. It's all about how to optimize your energy as the manager, as the keystone species in your ecosystem, so that it's really enjoyable and productive to manage. The other aspect about optimization is about energies from outside the system. And so this is all about your sectors, which is these energy flows. So the wind, the solar path throughout the year that's going to change from summer to winter. If you have smells or frost or wildlife that come through certain directions, or if there's a danger of a fire sector that's coming through, or there might be traffic. And the idea here is all of these energies, they're just energies. You need to find a way to put them to productive use. And so it's like, is there a way you can put that deer migration path to productive use? Is there a way you can put the annoying traffic on your road to productive use? Is there a way you can turn your wind into a resource rather than a problem? That's all about the third principle there. The third rule is optimization, is sectors and zones. And I will also say there's lots of research that's been done that it's almost impossible for the human mind to keep track of more than a few variables at a time. I think the number is like 4. And so you can't do this stuff without some kind of device, whether it's a computer, or a pen and paper, or there's just too many variables. and that's a lot of what I talk about in the book is a process to keep track of all these different pieces of data, so that your brain doesn't get overwhelmed. When you really lay it out, your brain is really good at making connections. It's terrible at organizing information and storing it.
Well, another thing I really like about permaculture is that once you get those systems set up and they're established, you don't have to think about it as much. It just kind of functions, and you don't have to put the thought into it. It's just while you're designing and while you're setting up and while you're getting things established, you need to really pay attention.
Exactly. Yeah. Jeff Lawton has a saying that, in permaculture, you're more likely to do 100 hours of thinking in 1 hour of work, versus in industrial systems, you do 1 hour of thinking in 100 hours of work.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
So the fourth rule here is anti-fragile. So the idea behind anti-fragile is, this is a term that was popularized by Nassim Haramein Taleb. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, but it's the ability to improve due to stress or volatility or mistakes. So, like, anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness, because resilient things, when there's a shock or a stress or some kind of a problem, they resist it, but they stay the same. So, like, you can stretch a rubber band, and best case scenario, it just goes back to being a rubber band. Anti-fragile systems, when you stretch them, they get better, they get stronger. So when you stretch your muscles, or you stress your muscles, they get stronger. When you stress a rubber band, it stays the same. So our ecosystems, our homesteads, are anti-fragile if we manage them properly. So rotational grazing is another great example of that. If you provide the right amount of stress, the right amount of rest and recovery, you will get an adaptation in both your animals and your pastures that will make them better than before. And like, these aren't small changes. These are, I've taken pastures on my farm that were literal golf greens. Like, you could putt across them because they were so overgrazed from horses. Now they are the best pastures on my farm. And the only thing we did was just stress, recovery, and adaptation, and just managing the animals that way. Another example would be compost, right? Is if you pile all the ingredients of a compost pile just in one big lump, and you leave it there, it'll destroy it. It just basically turns into ash. It needs disturbance. It needs to be mixed up, right? And there's other systems like I can't remember what it's called. He puts like the tubes and stuff in it, and the bioreactors or whatever. The same idea, that they're just finding other ways to put stress into the system. But your gardens are the same way. I'm not opposed to tillage. I know there's a whole movement right now that's all, no till or low till. And what's interesting is a lot of those systems, they're reliant upon an external source of volatility. So anyone who's doing no-till gardening, they're bringing in compost.
Well, and here's something I'll say about that too. It's like, I do think you're breaking up some beneficial things going on there in the soil. But the same people that would say never till, probably wouldn't be so against running some pigs or chickens through that same lot to till it for them. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing, right? And so it's about it's the dose dependency, right? And so, you want to get the right amount of the right thing at the right time in the right place. And when you get those things that optimize stress in there, they actually get better. And so I till my gardens, but I do it to create a seed bed. Like, I'm not tilling to kill weeds. I'm tilling to create a seed bed, which they're either bringing in compost, or they're bringing in a tilther, which is just like a small micro disturbance thing, or they're using, the subsoiler plow. Like, those are all examples. They're just different kinds of stress. I'm not a fan of fallow, where you're keeping the ground black. That's till kill weeds insanity. You're just planting more weeds. But disturbance is when you get the right amount of the right thing at the right time in the right place, it actually gets better. And so that's a really key principle when you're looking at anti-fragile systems. Or another way, we've already talked about this in the podcast, is like the problem is the solution, right? So whenever you're dealing with some kind of stress or volatility or mistake, your system, whether it's your pasture, your garden, your compost pile, your homestead, or your finances, or your relationships, they should be designed in such a way that stress makes them better. You know, like we all know couples who never fight, but they separate, right? And then we other couples who fight like cats and dogs, but then there's resolution and they have a great relationship afterwards, because that conflict, and you can fight in a non-productive way, but when the purpose of the fight is not who's right, it's what's right, that changes the whole dynamic. And now you're looking for truth, and there's no winner or loser. You are both getting closer to some idea that will make your lives better. And it's worth fighting to the death over those things, versus just someone's ego. And so that's the idea behind anti-fragility.
I think the most simplest example of that is just hardening off plants, seedlings.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if you don't give them some resistance, you can't toughen them up, because as soon as you stick them out into the environment, they're just going to wither and die. You have to let them adapt to that with some wind and some sun, and slowly, and they get stronger with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last, kind of the fifth rule that I have for permaculture design is ethical. And so this is about doing what's right. And there's lots of different schools of thought on what is right. Some people would say to do what's right is what God tells you, or what the policeman or the bureaucrat tells you, or whatever it is. And there's other systems of morality. There's like, morality doesn't exist, and there is no such thing as right and wrong, and it's all subjective. So I actually disagree with all those systems. I believe that what's right is essentially it's a version of the golden rule. It's mutual consent to mutual benefit. And the reason for that is you're not doing what's right because it's a sacrifice, or because you're holding yourself back, or you're limiting your well-being. It's like the idea that to not steal from someone, you're only doing that because you don't want to get caught or whatever. It's like, no, the reason you don't steal from someone really is because that would create a society where then someone might steal from you, and no one wants to live in a world like that. Like, why? There are no contradictions in reality, and so why can you do something that no one else can do? And so the idea of ethics and doing what's right is a profoundly self-interested idea, I believe. And so the way that permaculture looks at this is they have essentially three ethics, and they've been changed. There's various versions of them some of them, the earlier ones were pretty communist, and I don't like them very much. So the one that I've kind of settled on is people care, including yourself, people care, earth care, and future care. So basically, how do I act in a way that's good for myself and all my relations at present and into the future? But you're doing that not as a again, this sacrificial, I'm not going to do this thing because it's that it's
I think the way I see it, a lot of people, especially there's a lot of people who say they are permaculturists, but they'll say take people out of the equation. They think that people are the worst of all of it, and then they think, but they're ignoring that whole concept of people care, because you are part of nature, you are part of this design, and it's important to have that people care. It's not all about just people ruining everything, and that's how some people tend to think of it.
I agree. Yeah. And so this, when you act this way, it's from your own self-interest. It's you're not sacrificing it for someone else. It's for you to live this right. This way is makes your life better. And when we look at ethics as in that way, it goes from, like, for example, everyone thinks like economists and like these like business type people who are like, the typical quote, the left would call them capitalists. or like, but really it's these cronyist people who are doing, objectively corrupt things that are taking advantage of other people. And people would say that that's selfish.
Mhm.
It's not. It's stupid. Like they are creating a world where someone's going to screw them over, right?
Yeah.
Versus to live in a way that's true and fair and honest to not only other people but to animals, to milk cows. Like the reason I spent 5 years trying to figure out what was causing my cows mastitis is not because it was a sacrifice, is because I don't want to drink milk that has antibiotics in it.
Right.
And that's what everyone else does, right? So it's a profoundly self-interested philosophy to look at this way. And it's nuanced because we've been co-opted into thinking that selfishness is bad or that self-interest is bad, but it's actually not. Like we are these systems that are taking advantage of someone else, like the cronyist type people. They're not actually leading to a better world for the people doing the stealing. So
Isn't it funny how every apocalyptic movie just assumes that people will just degrade to the point of this happening if government isn't controlling them?
I know it is, and that it literally is one of the best propaganda techniques that government has.
Yeah.
If this criminal gang wasn't ruling over you, imagine how bad the other criminal gangs would be.
Yeah. Or imagine you would be in your own self if we wasn't holding back the awful person you could be.
Exactly. And so for me, this ethics piece is really key, and it's nuanced. But I think once people get it, it's like then we don't need rulers and governments and police officers and all these other social welfare programs, because people will, you'll help the person in need, not out of a sense of duty, but out of a sense of self-love, of like, I want to care for this person because if I know that if I don't, things are going to get way worse. And this person is, it's far better to have a traitor than an enemy, right?
Yeah.
Or a criminal. And that's, that kind of embodies, all the other principles in itself there, of this creating this anti-fragile systems where, versus live in a society where everyone wants to shirk off the responsibility. And now we need police officers and a legal system and prisons. And in order to run those, we need to have taxation, which steals from everyone else. And so, yeah, that gets my whole philosophy of voluntarism. But that's where I see this stuff going, is that by taking, personal responsibility for our own selves and our families and our own homesteads, we will eventually make the current system obsolete. And that's really what drives me. And my bigger vision is, and, the guys I work with at my company is we see, this is a revolution disguised as homesteading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. I think it's the best kind too to have, a best kind of revolution to have. I mean, because it's a gentle yet peaceful way of having a revolution, and that makes the biggest difference because it doesn't just benefit one area of your life; it benefits every area of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap up here in the next couple minutes, but is there anything you think we need to dive into before we kind of bring it to a close that we're leaving out that we think would be a good place to go as far as this topic?
No, I think the way to wrap it up is this kind of ties back to the suffering and well-being piece. But I think the most important thing, if people want to take one thing away, is make sure that it's fun. Whatever you're doing, it's not necessarily going to be easy, but make sure it's fun, because no one wants to join your revolution if it sucks.
Right.
And this is a revolution. Like we can't, like the left right now, and the environmentalists, like, they're trying to guilt people into doing the right thing, right? Or the governments are trying to regulate people into doing the right thing. Our revolution, we're going to win this when people see what we're doing and they see how fun and delicious and profitable and just how thriving our lives are. That's what's going to bring people into this revolution. And so there's enough suffering and problems in the world. We don't need to be making our own. And for me, that was a big one. Is I spent a lot of years where like the ends justified the means, right? It doesn't work that way. Like we have to. There's going to be work and there's going to be hard days, but if you can see yourself progressing towards some kind of a bigger goal, it's You're going to want to be there.
Yeah. And, you know, on some of the, just to kind of go back and tap into some of the things we talked about before, when you take it slow, when you add one thing at a time and you kind of master the things you're doing, they become to where they're not drudgery. And then you take on something else. That way it is enjoyable. That way it is fun.
Exactly.
You know, that way you want to keep doing it, you know, and I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at something. And so when you look at how many hours in a life that we have to live, we only get to be masters of a few things.
Yeah.
And which is why community and trading and like, I don't like the term self-sufficiency. It's not a goal of mine. I don't think that's the kind of, that's going to lead to a world of abundance and freedom. It's more about community interdependence and trade.
When I use that term self-sufficiency, I'm thinking of community as one of those resources that you have. I mean, that's just a resource of self-sufficiency.
Totally. And I think that's what most people mean, but for a lot of new people that get into it, they think, oh, I got to learn how to make my own clothes and cut my own flowers,
everything,
save my own seeds and like purify my own water and my own. It's like, no, you physically, there's no way you can do that. And if we did, we'd be moving back to the Stone Ages. Like specialization is what allows for civilization. The division of labor is absolutely key to this revolution. So I think everyone should garden, but only a few people should farm.
It's a key to abundance too. If you want to have, I mean, you can survive on a bare minimum and have that and call yourself self-sufficient. If you want to have more abundance, you want to have more diversity in your diet, in your life, you know, it takes a community. It takes a community for that. For
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, I want you to kind of wrap it up by letting everybody know where they can get information, anything you have that you want to put out there and kind of just let people know about what you're doing, what resources you have.
Yeah, you bet. So we've got our main website is buildingyourhomestead.com, and you'll find links for all of our socials. So my YouTube video, I've got a small Instagram channel. I'm starting to do a bit more on there, but lots of old videos. There's blogs. We've got our own podcast. There's lots of free resources. We've got a dairy cow, a food forest, a grazing dock, and a key principles for water guide that are free for download when you sign up to our newsletter on our website. And if anyone's looking for more one-on-one mentorship to buy, design, develop, or manage land, you can check some of our products and services on there. We are in the process of developing an online community of some sorts. We're still kind of figuring out what that could look like too, but where folks that don't have the budget to do one-on-one mentorship but still want to work with my team and I and be part of a large community, there's one of those networks in the works as well. So that's all on our website at buildingyourhomestead.com.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll have links for the website and also a link for the first episode you did back in last year. Great stuff. You talked all about the farm and the things you were implementing there and just all the steps. And it sounds like you've progressed even further in the education side of it.
I've been doing that for just about 10 years now too. So I just don't think it wasn't the focus on the first podcast, but no, the farm's still going strong and my time's split about 50-50 between the consulting and mentorship and the farming stuff.
Well, you have a lot to offer folks who are either looking to build a property or wanting to just kind of implement these teachings into their property. So I hope some people reach out to you, and I think in the long run they'll save a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of headache if they just if they learn from your mistakes rather than their own.
That's right. Yeah. There's I think the most valuable and the cheapest thing in the world you can buy is brains. and
somebody else's experience.
Somebody else's brain, and I hire consultants and experts all the time for other aspects of my business that I don't have the experience in, and it's so valuable. And it's not for everybody, but it's a service that we want to make available so that we can get more and more people into this revolution and to have fun and succeed fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope folks will look into that if they're looking for something like that. And like I said, just reading your blog and stuff. I've seen a blog post on getting your duckweed for your animals, and you got a lot of stuff on there. There were some great pictures of the farm too, the differences that's been made over the years too. So just if folks want to check that out, that's really cool. If they can just see what kind of difference it actually makes on a farm when you implement this kind of thinking and design. So, well, let's wrap it up with that. And until next time, folks, happy homesteading. God bless, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.